I'm Alexander Freeman, and this has been Remaking Normal. Episode 3, Authenticity and Visibility, Redefining Disability and Queer Identity. Today, I'm talking with activist, creator, and YouTuber Annie Segarra, known online as Annie Elainey, for a heartfelt and unfiltered conversation about disability, queer identity, love, and the urgent need for authentic representation in media. Annie, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Alexander. I'm so excited to be here.
How do you define normal?
That's always such a tricky question for me, especially as an autistic person, because I've seen the word normal used, and I've used it myself growing up for something that's aspirational, right? I was a little kid and I wanted to feel normal. And what that meant to me was fit in, to feel like I didn't stand out, make myself like everyone else. But I think now that I'm an adult, I also look at the word normal and think that it's just basically a myth built by power because, like, it's a social construct. We created this idea that there is normal, and now I'm questioning everything. Like, what even is normal? Is anybody actually normal? And especially from an autistic lens, I wonder all the time if, like, what we perceive as normal is all just a performance anyway. I think that normal is just what's most comfortable for the system at large and not necessarily what's true for everybody.
What does it mean to exist in two marginalized identities at once?
Through all of them, through a multiply marginalized lens. That's a real tough thing, I think, to try to like minimize into just a few sentences. But I think that the way my identities shape how I view the world, I think I have a very communal perception of the world. I look at my marginalized identities like being queer or a person of color or disabled. And because I live in oppressive systems, I rely a lot on community, and that really shines for me in thinking about disabled community and how we have to be there for one another because we live in a society that like does not value us and does not support us. So we survive by being there for each other. I guess that might be a good way to kind of wrap that up in a bow. My perception of the world is that while the world does not often support me or accept me, my marginalized identities have necessitated community care. And so it does make me feel very warm and safe to know that my community is there for me and that I am there for them. I think existing in honestly multiple marginalized identities at once, it's kind of being fluent in multiple kinds of activism, of resistance. It's carrying the weight of like several different worlds at the same time that are just often misunderstood. Again, being queer, person of color, Latina, disabled, like I'm constantly having to explain like my existence or like my actual belonging in a space. But I think it's also a kind of magic in that way. I think that like the things that we go through, you develop empathy and creativity and resilience that people who may not have these exact experiences, people with certain kinds of privilege, they may have never had to learn on their own. I constantly feel myself pretty exhausted with explaining my existence in a space at all. And I guess I should maybe elaborate on that. That like one thing that I find myself having to explain a lot is that I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user. So I use a wheelchair for long distances, but I'm able to walk around like within a small room. My gait, which is the way that I walk, is not often affected. I can walk in a way that people perceive as, quote, normal. But that's often if I'm up on my feet for just like, I don't know, a few seconds at a time, I can like pass for normal. I love that this word keeps coming up. And, but like, whether it's if I'm up on my feet for too long, which is if I go past like a minute or so on my feet, or just the fact that because I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, that is my big like overarching disability in my opinion. I get injured a lot. My joints subluxate, dislocate a lot. So when I'm I live in between preventing injury, experiencing injury, and recovering from injury, like all the time. All the time. So like somebody could see me walk out to my driveway, which is like one of my worst fears, and be like, that person is totally able-bodied. Like, and then the next day I'm limping to my car, and and the next day I am using my wheelchair the whole day. And that can be very confusing for people, that like I'm walking just fine one second and now I'm limping another second and now I'm using a wheelchair another second. And it's because my body is fluctuatingly in a state of preventing injury, experiencing injury, or recovering from injury all the time. And my joints, they're the hinges of your body, right? They're, for me, all my hinges are loose screws. Like they're just like, so imagine trying to get around, trying to ambulate on this body, and all the hinges are loose. Like it's not comfortable. My muscles are trying to cling on to the joints as much as possible, which makes my muscles hurt because my muscles are constantly tight, trying to keep those joints, those hinges, from falling apart. So I'm in like overall body chronic pain all the time. And see, I just explained it right now. Imagine trying to explain it to people every single time I meet them. It's not an easy thing to explain. But I feel all the time, because of what I said, I feel like I will be judged otherwise. So to exist in public is to have to try to explain myself and explain my body in order to prevent judgment. But if someone's response is to be like, why do you care what people think? That is the best case scenario, that people just judge, and the worst case scenario, that they become violent toward me because of their judgment. Because there's plenty of situations where somebody is infuriated by the idea that somebody is faking a disability, and then they harass them, they assault them. And that's kind of my big fear about being misunderstood as a ambulatory wheelchair user, as somebody who like attempts to, I do my best to try to walk sometimes. And like I said, sometimes you can barely tell that I'm in pain. You can barely tell that anything is going on with me. But but if you see that I have my disabled parking permit, or that I stand up and then I sit down to use a wheelchair, that there might be this idea that I'm faking a disability, and that's not true. So, and what I always think about in that situation, in that scenario, is that people, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of this righteous anger, right? Like, how dare you pretend to be a disabled person? And so I take it that they're trying to be protective or defend disabled people, but in doing so, in making these assumptions about disability when they don't know that disability can look different on everybody, they are actually harming a disabled person instead of protecting one. I have a couple times, mostly not so far anything extremely violent, but harassment. But people, again, at best, they're giving me a very big stink eye. But one of my first experiences being like someone getting in my face about it was maybe my first week ever using a wheelchair. And it was after an operation. So, like, in my head, I was like, there's no denying I need this wheelchair to get around. And I I'm able to drive my car and without any feet adaptations. I do have steering wheel adaptations because of the joints in my hands, but my car again looks normal. I wonder how many times the word normal is going to come out in this podcast. But yeah, the car that I was using, it was like a Toyota Camry or something, and it was like a compact vehicle, and my driving situation doesn't look too much different than anybody else's. And so I park my car, I get out of it, I walk out of it to the trunk of my car where I have this folding wheelchair, and I take it out, I get into it, and I go into a store. A woman from the parking lot saw me do that and followed me into the store, and she stopped me and she put her arm on my shoulder, not her arm, her hand on my shoulder, and stopped me to say, "Hey, just so you know, lost some weight, you probably wouldn't need that wheelchair." And I was in my first week of using a wheelchair, and I was still grieving my old body. I was still adjusting to a new mobility aid and adjusting to like that people were staring at me. I think that like when people get new visible signs of disability, that is an adjustment for all of us to like realize that something that's visible on us may draw attention to us that we hadn't experienced before. So that is all to say that I was not feeling super confident at the time. And I think when she said that, I was just very like shy and soft spoken and tried to defend myself very meekly. I was like, I made my body really small and I tried to explain. I tried to say, I look, actually, what's going on with me is that I have this condition, and I tried to explain as like politely as I could because I felt very freaking humble in that situation. And she interrupts me to say, yeah, I'm sure. But you really, you know that if you lost some weight, you wouldn't need that chair. And she walked away. That wasn't kind for several reasons. I have a body dysmorphia disorder on top of everything else. So I do have like difficulty with my body image and with how I see myself in the mirror. My brain makes over exaggerations in the mirror of what I look like, or not just in the mirror, in photographs too. Like I will think of myself as like a lot larger than I actually am. And sometimes I can kind of like get myself together, clear my head and be like, that's wrong. Like, come on, let's try to see ourselves as how we really are. And for a stranger to come up to me and tell me that I was so overweight that was the reason that I was like lazy or something. So it was like fat phobia, it was ableism, and it distorted my self-image. It was a body dysmorphia trigger for sure. And it made me feel a lot of shame. It made me feel like I should not be existing in public. Like I should just hide in my house and not exist, because if every time I step out of my door, I'm going to have to explain my existence, I don't want to do that. I will be burnt out. I will be exhausted. But I think the happy ending I can share about that is that I think I first started using a wheelchair like 2014. So maybe I've been using a wheelchair for a little bit over a decade. I certainly still struggle with like going to new events, go to large events with strangers because of that fear, because of that hesitancy that I like don't want to put myself through having to explain myself to people or deal with people's looks and things. But what I have found is really good communities and friendships, and like especially activist spaces where people are more informed about disability for the most part, and there's less having to explain. And especially in like disability focused spaces, there is so much less having to explain because people already know and they already understand. Like I anticipate having to explain, hey, yeah, I was using a wheelchair yesterday, but now I'm walking in this small space without it. And people go, you don't have to explain that. I know. Ambulatory wheelchair users exist. I know. And that is such a relief. So while I definitely I'm currently navigating like having to deal with the outside world and people who deem themselves normal versus me. I've definitely found like safer spaces and community and friends that like don't make me feel I'm not normal.
How do the queer and disability communities overlap?
I think the queer and disability communities overlap. I think they both have a way of questioning what is natural or what is normal, which is a powerful thing. Both communities would say there's nothing wrong with me existing as I am. But sometimes ableism does show up in queer spaces, and queer spaces tend to like really prioritize a certain body type, especially like, yeah, I'm not gonna like make it a gender thing. I was gonna, but no, I think queer spaces, as in like lesbian, gay, bi, and like the sexual orientation focused spaces, like, no, scratch that, delete. I'm going to say queer spaces. I'm going to say LGBT spaces. My brain really wanted to like do a little pattern recognition and separate groups of people, but no, it will redo. um, I would say that my observation has been like queer/LGBT spaces have like prioritized a certain kind of body type and a certain like beauty privilege, and like we're disabled people tend to like not be part of that. And I say that from like a personal experience of my own, where when I was living in Miami but prior to using a wheelchair, there was this bar, a gay bar there that I really loved going to. I loved it. They had great music, great vibe. I loved dancing there. And then I became a wheelchair user. And I wanted to go back to that bar. And it was only when I showed up that I realized the best dance floor, my favorite dance floor, is on the second floor. And this place does not have an elevator. They do not have an elevator for me. So I was like, gosh, but I was very determined to like get up there. So I said, okay, even though it hurts and even though I'm going to get out of there, I'm going to get up there really out of breath and dizzy because of my conditions. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I have POTS, which stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So with like any kind of exertion, my heart like rockets up to like over 100 beats per minute. Although it's going to impact me physically, I wanted to make the try to climb up the stairs and just go up there and sit down and have a good time. So I did that the first time. I left my wheelchair like by the side of the staircase and climbed up, and then I had to catch my breath and let my heart rate come down. But I sat up there at a booth and I enjoyed myself, minus some ableist interactions. But that's not really important to this story particularly. Actually, I guess it kind of is. So I'll say it really briefly. Like, I would sit at the bar and I would have like people I would have people offer to buy me a drink, but like out of pity and say, "You're so brave to be out here, out of the house where people can see you." And another person like was at the bar and they started crying at the sight of me. This was when I was sitting in my wheelchair, of course, and started crying at the sight of me and again telling me that I'm so brave. And I'm just trying to grab a drink. I don't know what's brave. Like, am I being brave for resisting and existing in an ableist society? I guess, but I don't think that that's what you're getting at. I don't think that's what you're talking about. And so, where I was getting to was that one day, those are examples of how, like, in queer spaces, there is a little ableism already. But then, like, the larger, like, systemically feeling ableism that I experienced was that I finally got myself a cane that also turned into a seat. And so I did what I did the last time. I parked my wheelchair by the staircase. I climbed up the stairs with my cane and I took the time to like catch my breath. And then I was able to actually hang out on the dance floor because I had my cane that turned into a seat. And the dance floor was not even very busy. I think it was just me and my two friends that I'd gone with on the dance floor at the time. So it was no kind of hazard at all. But one of the bouncers came up to me and said, "Hey, your wheelchair can't be down there." So they didn't say anything about my cane. They said, "My wheelchair cannot be downstairs unsupervised." And I said, "Oh." And they said, "You need to move it somewhere else." I'm like, "Okay, where do you want me to move it?" And he's like, "I don't know. It just can't be there." I said, "Okay. Also, if you're asking me to go downstairs to move it somewhere and you don't know where, I also like, if I go downstairs, I can't get back up because my abilities allow me to like make this staircase climb like the one time. And that's it. That's all I've got. I can't do it again." And he said, "Well, that's not my problem." I'm like, "Okay, so you're basically saying that because my wheelchair is down there and I can't come back up, that essentially you're asking me to leave if we can't find another solution." And he did not care. He's like, "Okay, fine." And just walked away. And I think the way that I'm telling this story, probably because enough time has passed for me to be able to tell it like straightforward. Maybe it feels for me like it's not as intense as it felt in the moment. But for me, I thought that whole interaction was very cruel. And I felt really embarrassed and really unwelcome and not wanted in that space. I was holding in my tears after this interaction, and I just told my friends that we had to go. And I climbed down the stairs after all that effort to get up the stairs. And I got in my wheelchair and we left. And like on the sidewalk, I was like, my energy was very much like, let's just get to the car, let's just get to the car. But I was like holding in my tears the whole time because I had felt so humiliated by the situation. And in my mind, it didn't make sense. And the only way that it did make sense was that they specifically did not want a wheelchair, like bumming people out, like downstairs, because there was no real hazard. I'd done it before without a problem. And they just didn't want the chair there. And they didn't care if I disappeared. They were like, good. I definitely have felt the sting of like ableism in queer spaces. And it can be vice versa, right? Sometimes people within the disability community, they can struggle with queerness and clinging to like respectability politics to like try to gain acceptance. That kind of thing can happen as well. I have not experienced it as much, but I'm sure that can happen as well. So I think that both communities need to deepen their solidarity with one another, because ultimately we are fighting the same systems that police our bodies, our desires, and our worth.
And where do they fail each other?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'm talking about a gay bar, but like even massive like pride events like can be very inaccessible to the disabled community as well, acting as if there is no overlap. Like they totally, and the truth is, I believe that there are some statistics, and I'm sorry to say that I don't have them off the top of my head, but there are some statistics of immense overlap of disabled queer people, especially like if you consider like mental illness like depression or anxiety under the umbrella of disability, which most people would, that would be a multiply marginalized person that is a queer and disabled person. But in the to be more broad and to talk about like the disability community as a whole, they tend to not be very welcome in like giant pride events, and it's very, very hard. It is a big mission for so many disabled people to get out there, whether they are deaf or blind or wheelchair user or autistic or other neurodivergence. Like it's hard to join in on activities and events that we're supposed to feel welcome to because they are our communities as well. But I feel it all the time as a disabled person that like disability and accessibility is often left on the back burner. It is not prioritized. And that is not okay. We need, as activists, whether it's like LGBT justice or feminism or any other particular like focus of activism, climate change activism, it doesn't matter. People need to start considering disability and considering disability in their actions and what they're saying and in the accessibility of the information that they're sharing or the events that they're organizing, because disability is part of every single group and every single like activist issue. So we have to be able to like work together, and that's not going to happen unless we can work together to create accessibility for a disabled community in those spaces.
What kind of love stories or representation did you need growing up but never saw?
The kind of love stories or representation in general that I needed to see but I never saw, I think firstly, I need disabled people to be loved out loud, not pitied and not inspirational, but just for who they are, desired and adored. I need queer, fat, brown bodies being kissed on screen, sexual on screen. And I need to see that love and care don't require curing them or fixing them, just witnessing and choosing them. I need to see that. Fortunately, right now in my life, I have I have the experience of like seeing full acceptance love like that. I am in a relationship where we're both autistic and like we work together and we accept each other, and like I'm so glad that like it came into my life for me to be able to see it myself. There are fortunately like YouTube channels and things. One of my biggest channels that comes to mind for me is Jessica Out of the Closet and her wife Claudia. And Jessica also has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and she is deaf. And they are such a great example of like what a relationship can look like, especially a queer relationship can look like, where disability is like fully accepted and loved and adored, and there's no like there's no expectation of like disability changing.
Can you talk a little about your own relationship?
An example of like what acceptance of disability can look like in a relationship is learning about each other's disabilities and learning what we may be experiencing or going through. And within my own experience, we autism really affects like our relational skills a lot and our emotions. We get like very big emotions about things. Like an example would be if we're expecting something to go a certain way, but it doesn't go that way, it can create very big feelings of like distress. And the way we like navigate those things is having like big conversations beforehand about what those moments look like and what do we need in those moments. So it's important for us to know like how we can support each other when something feels too big or when we're feeling in distress or when we might be experiencing like autistic burnout or autistic meltdown. Asking somebody in the middle of a meltdown is like not the best idea. They probably cannot, like even if they wanted to, tell you how they are best supported in that moment. So it's important to talk about those things beforehand. And in general, we just practice a lot of honesty. And even if that honesty like maybe doesn't feel good at the time, we make space for like if somebody's feelings are hurt, because sometimes maybe you didn't say anything horrifically offensive, but somebody else has their own sensitivities around certain things and you didn't say anything wrong, but they still got their feelings hurt. So you make space to like comfort each other, to co-regulate and give each other that reassurance and what the other person needs. That is like one way to practice that. I think in like more like visual ways, I think it's important to talk about like what someone needs physically. Like in my head, the example that pops up is going out in public together, right? And we talked earlier on about how like difficult it can feel to go out in public because I feel like I have to explain myself all the time, or there is judgmental looks and things. And I've had the experience where I'll be out with my partner. This happened like one time before we like talked about it and said, I need you to like pay attention to when this might happen because this might happen. Where people started to only talk to my partner, but to ignore me to the extent that like there was like a group circle talking and the circle kind of like closed in and left me on the outside. And when that happened, I'm typically a kind of independent person. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to like wander off by myself and take a look at the rest of this event. But afterwards, I was like, this moment where the conversation seems to like close in and exclude me, I did feel excluded and hurt by that. And I felt like people were ignoring me and not wanting to talk to me because my disabilities, because of my wheelchair. And that starts a conversation around, well, how do we prevent something like that from happening? What can we do? What needs to be done? And it's things like, I just need you to watch out that this is a thing that might happen. I think it would help if like you liaison and introduce me and make sure that I'm like kept in the loop of things. And it's about, it's just largely about having this like open forum with each other about communicating what the other one needs. I gave an example about like my needs because I don't want to put my partner stuff out there, but it goes both ways. Like she will communicate like her needs to me and mine to her, and we work together to make sure that we're constantly feeling supported.
How has embracing queerness and disability changed the way you love?
I came out as queer 19, and up until that point, I didn't really date at all. So that alone, just like coming out as queer, is already going to change like how I experience my dating life, my sex life. And once I was out, I felt very liberated, and I love I love being gay. I love being a lesbian. I love my experience with that, with my love life and my sexual life. And when disability became even more like even a larger part of my life and of my circumstances, I realized that like my worth doesn't come so much from like what I can do, but like how deeply I can be be myself, to be present. And the intersection of like being queer and disabled, like it taught me that love is not a performance. It is presence. It's being with each other. So loving as a queer and disabled person means defining romance around accessibility, around consent, communication, deep honesty, and like just tenderness all around. And I think that the experience of being queer and disabled, like accepting myself as a queer person, accepting myself as a disabled person, and experiencing how I experience love as a disabled person, as a queer person, that is a radical and beautiful thing.
What are you working on now?
What am I working on now? I'm actually right now in the process of editing a script, a series that I have written that's still in like, it's a completed first draft, which I'm really proud of, but it's still obviously in like early stages because it's only a first draft that I've written. But it's an 8 episode series, a script about, and it with the definitely, I want to make it like a series, like something that continues to grow, about 4 queer disabled femmes in their mid to late 20s, and they mostly it's very closely based off of myself and my real life friends who also have very similar conditions: Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, connective tissue disorders, and like all the different like medical conditions that like come with that. And they come from different places, different privileges or lack of privileges, and are trying to navigate like their life as queer disabled people, and their dating life and their trauma, and how they have found each other and support each other through those things. It's been a passion project of mine since like, I don't know, 2017 maybe. And like, yeah. And like, yeah, I'm very excited about that. That's something that's been taking up a lot of my focus, a lot of my time. So I feel a little bit like I've neglected social media a bit. I'm still pretty active on like Instagram stories and trying to share resources on there as much as I can. And I'm trying to make a schedule for myself to continue to do social media content creation and continue to create content that is helpful to people and connects people. But this story, this passion project of mine has taken up a lot of time, and I really want to like dedicate myself to that and see where that goes. So yeah, I'm really excited about that.
What keeps you hopeful about humanity's ability to change?
Ooh wee! I'm so glad for that question, because it's kind of hard to feel hopeful sometimes. And hearing that question today of all days is really, hearing that today, it feels really cosmic, because right now, as SNAP benefits are about to be denied to people, I'm seeing more than ever people wanting to get together, to be in community, to practice community care, and make sure that their neighbors are fed, make sure that their neighbors are safe. And I'm hopeful because I'm hopeful that humanity has the ability to change because of the fact that I can see that we already are. I see that there is a lot of good in people and what they're trying to do. And as a disabled person and as a disabled activist, I can often be in a rush to see change. I kind of like want to see it all fixed by tomorrow. Like just stop the nonsense and get it together and fix it by tomorrow. And I say that that rush, that rush is the thing that can kind of make somebody lose hope and get more cynical about things because we're not seeing immediate change. And I try to recognize that within myself. But today, specifically, I've been seeing people ask the questions like, how can I help? What can I do? I've been seeing people say, there are mutual aid groups. There are food pantries. We can try to provide snacks to trick-or-treaters this year instead of candy. Like there's so many ways that people are trying to help. And so I see that there is room for people who care to learn and put that into practice, put that into a daily practice. So as time goes on, right, every ramp, every like pronoun that gets respected, every protest, every piece of art or a poem, they are proof that the world is capable of change and that the world is shifting. Change doesn't happen in a moment. It just doesn't. It happens in millions of tiny acts of care. And care, community care, despite everything, it's going to keep surviving and it's going to help us to keep surviving as well.
I'm Alexander Freeman, and this has been Remaking Normal. The people you'll hear on this podcast and the stories they share remind us that normal isn't a rule to follow. It's something personal, something evolving, something we create every time we choose to be real. If you've been inspired by these conversations, make sure to subscribe to Remaking Normal wherever you listen to podcasts, and to the Outcast Productions LLC YouTube channel for films and more. Follow me on Instagram at @RealAlexanderFreeman. You can also visit myownnormalmovie.com to learn more about my documentary My Own Normal, and explore outcast-productions.com and consider working together on a film. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for being part of this journey. Together, we're remaking normal.